Dad left me. I'm so cold.
Come here, I'll keep you safe.
Boston, midnight, snow cuts the air. Nathaniel Cross, a Boston CEO with a life of meetings and miles, steps from a silent dinner and sees him. A barefoot boy under a broken street lamp, clutching a small red toy fire truck. Lips blue, whisper, "Dad said, wait. One coat, one drive, one promise." If compassion finds you in a blizzard, do you walk past or change a life? Snow came sideways across Beacon Street, the wind howling down the hill like it had teeth. Nathaniel Cross slipped from a hotel door into the white roar, his breath visible, his mind still ticking through numbers and names from a high-stakes investor dinner. Grid storage, coastal wind, transmission lines, the future of power. None of it felt like power under this sky. He tugged his navy overcoat tight, the collar up against his jaw. For a moment, headlights smeared across the snow and vanished. Then the street went quiet again. He walked because the car was late, because the air woke something he'd let sleep too long. At mid-block, a street lamp flickered, then failed, leaving a cone of gray darkness swallowing a bus stop bench and the drifted sidewalk around it. He would have passed it, would have kept moving toward the corner where his driver usually idled, if not for the shape tucked beneath the dead lamp. It was small, still, bare feet on salted concrete, pajamas clinging wet to thin legs. A boy sat hunched, arms wrapped around his ribs as if he were trying to hold himself together. In his fist, reddened and raw, he gripped a tiny red toy fire truck. Snow had gathered in his hair and along his shoulders like ash. He didn't look up. Nathaniel stopped. The wind shoved at his coat. He had stood in the rooms where billions changed hands with a handshake and a smile. He had stared down city councils, hostile boards, rival bidders. Yet this sight unstrung him. He stepped closer, slow, careful, as if a quick movement might shatter the boy. "Hey," he said, voice low, the word trailing smoke into the cold. No answer. Up close, the boy couldn't have been more than 9. Blue lips, teeth set against the chattering. The fire truck's ladder was chipped at the tip, a missing plastic rung revealing a pale stripe where paint once was. Nathaniel crouched so the boy wouldn't have to lift his head. Snow stung his cheeks and caught along the gray streaks in his dark hair. "Are you hurt?" he tried. "Are you alone out here?" The boy blinked finally, lashes crusted with frost. His eyes were a startling, steady brown, the kind that had learned to read rooms before anyone spoke. He didn't answer the questions. He hugged the toy tighter, then pressed the truck against his chest like a badge, like a shield. The wind gusted, and he flinched, but he didn't run. Nathaniel's phone buzzed somewhere beneath his coat. He silenced it without looking. He slid a gloved hand toward the boy, then paused, not wanting to spook him. "I'm Nathaniel," he said softly. "I just want to help." A shiver racked the small frame. The boy's feet were purpled at the edges. The skin cracked where street salt had done its work. There was a torn tag on the pajama top, half ripped so the brand name was just a frayed white tongue. Around them, Beacon Hill's iron railings wore sugar caps, stoops buried to their knees. Far off, a siren threaded the storm, high and thin, then fell away. Nathaniel shrugged out of his overcoat and angled it like a windbreak, kneeling so the wool became a wall between the boy and the night. Snow collected along his suit sleeve, on the red tie he'd forgotten to loosen. He could feel the cold seeping through the fabric, but the boy's shoulders eased half an inch in the sudden shelter. The fire truck's tires squeaked faintly where his thumb worried at them. "What's your name?" Nathaniel asked. Silence, then a breath that sounded like paper tearing. The boy's gaze slid to the bus schedule, its dates and routes buried in frost. He lifted the fire truck, rolled it once along his palm, then stopped as if the motion cost too much. He swallowed and licked his lips. Nothing came out. He looked down again. Nathaniel glanced toward the hotel, then back to the boy. How long had he been here? 10 minutes? An hour? Time had rules in boardrooms, neat and numbered. Out here, it was a creature that bent around need. He tried again, slower. I can get you warm. Shoes, too. Food. We can figure out the rest from there. He kept his tone level, a steady hum under the wind. You don't have to tell me anything yet. The boy's eyes flicked to Nathaniel's hand, to the coat, back to the dying lamp. A muscle jumped at his jaw. He looked like he was weighing something enormous with tools too small for the job. The toy truck creaked in his grip. For a second, his face softened, a child's face under the storm. He opened his mouth, closed it, and shivered so hard the truck rattled. Nathaniel felt the decision arrive inside him like a door quietly opening. Deals could wait. Cars could circle the block forever. He eased the coat toward the boy's shoulders, not touching skin, letting the wool fall where gravity decided. It's okay, he said, quieter than before. Let me keep the wind off you. The boy didn't pull away. He let the coat drape him, small bones vanishing beneath the heavy fabric, only the top of his head and the bright red of the truck still visible against the gray. Snow hissed around the edges of their little shelter, piling on the bench, filling Nathaniel's footprints until it was as if he'd never walked there at all. A bus growled somewhere in the white distance. The boy drew a breath that had words in it. Snow swirled harder, lashing against the dead street lamp. Nathaniel Cross held still, his coat around the boy, listening as the fragile breath carried words at last. The child's lips moved, blue and cracked. His voice was hoarse, almost swallowed by the wind. Dad said, "Wait here." Nathaniel's chest tightened. He leaned closer, the storm muffling the rest of Boston until it was only the two of them. The boy didn't meet his eyes. He stared at the fire truck clutched in his hand, the chipped ladder pressing into his skin. "Wait here?" Nathaniel repeated softly. "For how long?" The boy shrugged, small shoulders lost under wool too heavy for him. His eyes flickered toward the darkened street, then back down. "How long have you been out here?" No answer. Only another shiver, harder this time. His teeth chattered. Nathaniel swallowed. He could still hear the echo of laughter from the dinner hall, champagne glasses clinking, investors debating numbers that could shift the future of cities. Yet, none of that mattered under this broken lamp. "What's your name?" he asked. The boy hesitated. He tightened his grip on the toy, whispering into it first, as though telling the truck a secret. Then he lifted his head just enough to answer. "Daniel." The single word was frail but steady. Nathaniel felt it land with weight. "Daniel," he said, nodding slowly. "I'm Nathaniel." The boy blinked, almost disbelieving that anyone would bother telling him a name back. His lips trembled. Nathaniel saw how raw his hands were, fingers split open at the edges, knuckles swollen from cold. "You're freezing." Nathaniel's voice softened, more urgent. "You can't stay here." Daniel's shoulders stiffened. His gaze darted to the street again. Dad said, "Wait here." Something sharp twisted in Nathaniel's chest, abandoned, in the middle of a blizzard. He shook his head slowly. "Daniel, I don't think he's coming back." The boy's breath hitched, almost a sob, but swallowed down fast, like he'd learned not to let it out. He hugged the fire truck to his chest until his knuckles whitened. Nathaniel crouched lower, making sure his tone carried no command, only promise. "You don't have to wait in the cold. Let me get you warm, just for tonight." Daniel looked at him through lashes stuck with frost. His eyes were pools of fear and something older than any child should know, disappointment. He didn't nod, didn't move. Nathaniel stayed kneeling. Snow soaked his trousers, the cold biting, but he didn't care. "I won't leave you. Not like this." The wind cut between them. A bus rumbled past, its windows fogged with strangers heading anywhere but here. Daniel flinched at the roar, then clutched his truck tighter, whispering into it again. Nathaniel caught the faint words. "Thank you." It was enough. Nathaniel rose, the snow crunching under his shoes, and glanced up the block. Most shops were shuttered, their windows dark, but one corner store still glowed faintly, a neon sign buzzing against the storm. He looked back at Daniel, barefoot, trembling, lips almost purple. No choice. "I'll be right back," Nathaniel said gently. "Stay here. Keep my coat on." Daniel's eyes widened, panic flickering across his face. His hands clutched the fire truck as though it might anchor him. Nathaniel crouched again, steady voice firm but kind. "I promise, Daniel. I'm not leaving you. Just 2 minutes. For you." The boy didn't nod, but he didn't run either. That was trust enough. Nathaniel jogged through the storm, each gust biting through his suit. Inside the store, warmth rushed at him along with fluorescent light. The clerk looked up in surprise at the snow-dusted executive. Nathaniel grabbed the thickest coat in sight, a pair of boots, wool socks, gloves, and a knit cap. He didn't even check the sizes. Anything was better than frostbite. At the counter, he tossed down his black card. "Keep the change," he muttered, already moving. Back under the broken lamp, Daniel was still there, still small, still hunched, his breath a thin mist in the night. Relief surged through Nathaniel. He knelt again, the plastic bag rattling. "Let's get these on." He eased the heavy coat around Daniel's shoulders, careful not to startle him. The boy stiffened, eyes darting as if expecting the gift to vanish. But the warmth seeped in, and his frame sagged with the first measure of relief. Nathaniel slipped socks over the raw feet, then boots snug around them. Gloves, cap, piece by piece. The armor of winter went on until the child no longer looked like a shadow waiting to disappear. Daniel whispered something, too soft at first. Nathaniel leaned closer. "Thank you," he said again. Only this time, not to the truck, to him. Nathaniel's throat tightened. He placed a hand briefly on the boy's shoulder, firm and steady. "You're safe now." Daniel nodded slightly, then lifted his fire truck, pressing it against his new coat. His lips moved again, whispering into the toy as though it were listening. Nathaniel caught it. He didn't leave. The words struck deep. In boardrooms, Nathaniel had built empires, signed contracts that shifted skylines, but no document, no deal, had ever carried the weight of that simple statement from a freezing child. Snow still fell hard, but inside the circle of light, Nathaniel knew one truth with absolute clarity. He couldn't walk away. The snow piled deeper as Nathaniel guided Daniel toward his car parked at the curb. The boy hesitated at the sight of the black sedan, its polished frame glowing under the streetlight haze. He clutched his fire truck tighter, eyes darting with the instinct of someone taught not to trust gifts that came too easily. Nathaniel opened the back door, crouching so he was eye level again. "It's warm inside. Just a ride, Daniel. That's all." The boy lingered, his boots squeaking in the snow. Finally, he slid onto the leather seat, holding the fire truck on his lap like a shield. Nathaniel closed the door gently and circled to the driver's side. The heater hummed to life, fogging the windows in seconds. As the car crept through the blizzard, Boston's streets blurred into white corridors. Daniel kept staring out, every passing light reflecting in his wide eyes. When the sedan turned onto Beacon Hill, the wrought iron gates of Nathaniel's mansion loomed ahead, their lamps glowing against the snow. Daniel stiffened. He shifted the fire truck from one hand to the other, whispering something into it, too faint to catch. The gates opened, and the car rolled up the long drive to the front steps of the sprawling home. The mansion stood like a fortress, windows glowing gold, the roof lines capped with snow. Nathaniel parked and stepped out, then opened Daniel's door. "Come on," he said quietly. "You'll freeze out here." Daniel climbed out slowly, boots crunching against the salted stone. His eyes moved over the towering front doors, the wide steps, the statues flanking the path. He hugged the fire truck so tight his knuckles paled. Inside, warmth spread instantly. The marble foyer gleamed, chandeliers glittering above. But Daniel didn't look at the grandeur. He backed against the wall, small shoulders tense, gaze flicking from hallway to staircase as if preparing to flee. Nathaniel noticed. He shed his gloves and crouched again. "This isn't a trap," he said softly. "It's just a house. You're my guest." Daniel's eyes shifted to the fire crackling in a nearby hearth. The flames reflected in his gaze, uncertain but yearning. "Let's start there," Nathaniel suggested, nodding toward the living room. He led Daniel to the wide stone fireplace. The boy crouched near it, hands spread toward the warmth, still holding the fire truck. His lips moved. This time Nathaniel heard clearly. "Don't take it away." Nathaniel's chest tightened. He sank into the armchair beside him. "No one's taking it," he said gently. "Not the fire, not your truck, not this moment." Daniel glanced at him, wary, then leaned closer to the fire. For the first time his shivering slowed. The fire crackled, casting a warm glow across the room as Daniel huddled near the hearth. His knees were drawn up to his chest, the oversized coat swallowing his small frame. Nathaniel watched quietly from the armchair, giving him space. After a long silence, he stood and stepped into the kitchen. Within minutes, the scent of chicken soup and warm bread drifted back into the living room. He carried a tray to the low table by the fire. "Hungry?" Nathaniel asked gently. Daniel didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked to the bowl, then back to his fire truck. Slowly, almost suspiciously, he reached for the spoon. His first sip was careful, guarded, as though expecting it to vanish. He nibbled the bread in tiny bites, pausing each time to make sure it wasn't taken away. Nathaniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You don't have to rush. There's plenty more." Daniel's gaze darted up, meeting his eyes for the briefest moment. Then he nodded once and returned to eating, the fire truck never leaving his other hand. Nathaniel felt the weight of it, a child so used to loss he couldn't trust even a bowl of soup to stay his. The realization stung. He had walked away from countless deals with billions on the line, but this boy's silent fight for every crumb of safety broke through all his defenses. When the bowl was finally empty, Daniel set it down carefully, like returning borrowed property. He whispered into the toy truck, "Still here." Nathaniel's throat tightened. He reached over, adjusting the blanket draped across Daniel's shoulders. "You're safe here," he said softly. "No one's taking anything from you tonight." Daniel's eyes fluttered, exhaustion overtaking him. His small frame curled on the rug, firelight flickering across his face as he drifted toward sleep. Nathaniel stayed seated, watching him, knowing instinctively that this night had changed everything. Daniel stirred in his sleep, murmuring faintly, clutching the red fire truck against his chest. Nathaniel sat nearby in the dim glow of the fireplace, the weight of questions pressing harder than the storm outside. Who would leave a boy in the snow? When morning broke, pale winter light spilled through tall windows. Nathaniel found Daniel still curled by the hearth, the blanket slipped halfway. He set a mug of cocoa on the table and crouched. "Time to wake up, buddy." Daniel's eyes blinked open, wary, as though bracing for something harsh. Then he spotted the cocoa and sat up slowly. "Do you want to tell me where your mom is?" Nathaniel asked gently. Daniel's voice was small, cracked with sleep. "Hospital?" Nathaniel froze. "She's in the hospital?" Daniel nodded. "Car crash. She doesn't wake up." His fingers traced the truck's chipped ladder. "Dad, he said I was too much trouble." His voice broke on the last word, but he swallowed it fast as if even tears might be punished. Nathaniel's chest ached. Rage simmered at the thought of a father walking away, but sorrow weighed heavier. For the boy, for the mother fighting for life. "You're not too much trouble," Nathaniel said firmly. "Do you hear me? Not ever." Daniel glanced up, brown eyes wide, testing if the words were true. Nathaniel held his gaze steady. The boy whispered into the truck. He said it. Nathaniel reached out, resting a hand lightly on his shoulder. "You deserve better than what he said. And until your mom wakes up, you won't be alone." Daniel leaned into the touch, just slightly, the first crack in the wall he'd built. Nathaniel knew then his life was no longer just his own. That night, after Daniel had finally drifted into deeper sleep on the sofa, Nathaniel retreated to his study. The house was quiet, only the faint ticking of an antique clock filling the silence. His desk, usually stacked with reports and contracts, now felt hollow. He opened his laptop, half expecting the comfort of numbers to steady him. Instead, the screen's glow only sharpened the truth. None of it mattered compared to the fragile boy asleep in the next room. He leaned back, running a hand through his dark hair, eyes drawn to the window where snow still fell. For years, he had built cross-infrastructure into a titan of renewable energy, fighting for funding, battling boards, always projecting control. Tonight, control felt like an illusion. On the coffee table nearby sat the boy's red fire truck, left there for the first time, its chipped ladder gleaming in the lamplight. Nathaniel stared at it, struck by how something so small carried the whole weight of trust. His thoughts drifted to fatherhood, a word he'd never let himself dwell on. Work had been his shield, his excuse. He told himself he didn't have time, that love was a distraction, that family could wait. But now, the boy's whispered words replayed in his mind. He didn't leave. Nathaniel exhaled slowly, the sound heavy in the stillness. He had wealth, power, and influence that stretched across states. Yet, what did it mean if a child froze on his city's streets, whispering thanks into a toy? For the first time, Nathaniel wondered if his empire had been built on the wrong foundation. Not because the work lacked worth, but because it had left him empty. Daniel's presence, unexpected, unplanned, had exposed that truth with brutal clarity. He closed the laptop, stood, and walked to the sofa. Daniel stirred slightly, clutching the blanket closer. Nathaniel adjusted it, careful not to wake him, then sat nearby. "I don't know if I can be a father," he murmured into the dark, "but I know I can't walk away." The fire truck caught a final glint of lamplight, as if answering. Nathaniel sat there until the storm quieted, his resolve slowly taking shape. By morning, Nathaniel's decision had hardened into action. He couldn't rely on guesses. He needed answers. While Daniel ate breakfast at the kitchen counter, still holding his fire truck between bites of toast, Nathaniel stepped into the study and made a call. "Elias," he said when the private investigator picked up, "I need you to run a case, quietly. A child. Name's Daniel. His mother's in a coma after a car accident. Father's vanished." There was a pause on the line. "That's heavy, Nathaniel. You sure?" "I've never been surer," Nathaniel replied. "I need every detail, hospital records, family, anything, and fast." When he returned, Daniel was rinsing his plate as if afraid leaving crumbs might be wrong. Nathaniel set the dish aside. "You don't have to clean up, Daniel. Not here." The boy just shrugged, eyes dropping to the floor. Later that evening, Elias arrived with a slim folder. Nathaniel opened it under the lamp's glow. The reports confirmed what Daniel had whispered. His mother, Elena, lay in Massachusetts General, critical but alive. His father had walked out weeks ago, no legal trace left behind. Child Services had flagged Daniel as unaccounted for. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He imagined the boy out in the snow, told to wait, discarded like a problem. His fists curled until the paper crumpled. He closed the folder slowly. Looking across the room where Daniel sat on the rug, rolling the fire truck back and forth. A small sound, ordinary, yet it filled the mansion in a way quarterly reports never had. Nathaniel knew then. The system would take Daniel unless he acted. Foster care, strangers. A life shuffled through files. He couldn't let that happen. He sat down beside the boy. "Daniel," he said softly, "no matter what happens, I'm here. You're not alone." Daniel studied him for a long moment, then pressed the fire truck into Nathaniel's palm just for a heartbeat before pulling it back. It wasn't surrender. It was trust, tested and growing. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived at the mansion. Nathaniel opened it at his desk, heart sinking as he scanned the legal notice. Child Services had located Daniel through hospital records. Placement in foster care was already scheduled. He rubbed his temples, the fire truck sitting beside the letter like a silent witness. How could the state call this stability? Taking a boy who had already lost everything and handing him to strangers. In the living room, Daniel sat cross-legged by the fireplace, the coat Nathaniel had bought draped around him like armor. His lips moved against the toy truck, whispering words Nathaniel couldn't quite hear. Then Daniel's small voice broke the quiet. "Will they take me away?" Nathaniel froze, the letter still in his hand. The boy had overheard his phone call. He crouched down so they were eye level. "Not if I can help it," Nathaniel said firmly. Daniel's eyes shimmered. "They always take me away. First my dad, then my mom. Now them." He clutched the fire truck so tight his knuckles whitened. Nathaniel's throat tightened. He reached out, steadying the boy's trembling hands. "Listen to me. I stopped that night because I couldn't walk past you. I won't walk past you now. You have my word." For a long moment, Daniel just stared, as if weighing whether words could really be trusted. Finally, he leaned into Nathaniel's arm, whispering into the truck, "He promised." Nathaniel looked back at the letter on the desk. A battle was coming, one fought not with contracts or capital, but with loyalty and truth. And he was ready. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and nerves. Nathaniel sat straight at the petitioner's table, his navy suit immaculate, though his pulse beat heavier than any boardroom negotiation. Across the aisle, representatives from Child Services shuffled papers, arguing procedure and precedent. Daniel sat between them for only a moment before being called forward. Too small for the witness chair, his legs dangled above the floor. He clutched the red fire truck in both hands, its chipped ladder catching the overhead light. The state's attorney spoke crisply. "Your Honor, we acknowledge Mr. Cross's generosity, but foster care provides a stable, vetted system. One man, no matter how wealthy, cannot substitute for structure." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. Wealth, power, stability, they didn't understand. This wasn't about numbers. The judge adjusted her glasses, eyes flicking to Daniel. "Do you have something to say, young man?" The boy swallowed, his voice barely above a whisper. "He stopped for me." The room quieted. Daniel held up the fire truck like proof. "He gave me a coat. He didn't leave. Everyone else did. But he didn't." The attorney shifted uncomfortably. The judge leaned forward, expression softening. Nathaniel's throat burned. He wanted to speak, to promise again, but the truth had already been spoken by the one who mattered most. Silence stretched, broken only by the faint squeak of the fire truck's wheels as Daniel rolled it back and forth nervously. For the first time in years, Nathaniel felt powerless, and yet, strangely, more certain than ever. The outcome was still uncertain, but Daniel's words had pierced through the cold language of the law. Whatever happened next, they had stepped into this fight together. The gavel had barely echoed from the last hearing when the unexpected happened. The courtroom doors opened, and a man strode in, unkempt, eyes glassy, his coat reeking of stale liquor. Daniel froze, his fire truck slipping slightly in his grip. "I'm his father," the man announced, voice rough. "I want my son back." Whispers rippled through the room. Nathaniel's pulse spiked. This was the man who had left Daniel in the snow? The state's attorney seized the opportunity. "Your Honor, the biological father has appeared. This complicates custody proceedings." The judge frowned, but Nathaniel barely heard her. He was staring at Daniel, whose body had shrunk in on itself, small shoulders trembling. The man's gaze landed on Nathaniel, hard and resentful. "You think you can buy him? He's mine." Nathaniel rose slowly, measured, his deep blue eyes locked on the intruder. "He's not a deal to be made. He's a child you abandoned." The man's sneer faltered, but he pressed on. "I can take care of him. Maybe there's compensation to discuss." His tone shifted slick, like an angle he thought he could play. Nathaniel's fury burned hot, but he steadied his voice. "This isn't about money. This is about a boy who deserves better than being left to freeze under a broken street lamp." Daniel's grip tightened on the fire truck. He whispered into it, as if reminding himself. He stayed. The courtroom buzzed with tension, the truth about to collide with lies. Nathaniel knew the fight had only just begun. The judge raised a hand, silencing the room. "Enough posturing. We'll hear from the child directly." Daniel's eyes widened. He glanced at Nathaniel, then at the man who claimed him, shoulders shaking. The judge's voice softened. "Daniel, do you understand what's happening?" The boy clutched the fire truck so tightly the plastic creaked. He slid off his chair and shuffled forward, small boots echoing in the chamber. Standing before the bench, he lifted his chin with surprising steadiness. "My dad left me in the snow," he said, voice trembling but clear. "He told me to wait. He never came back." The courtroom hushed. Daniel looked down at the toy in his hands. "Mr. Cross stopped. He gave me a coat. He kept me warm. He didn't leave." His voice cracked, but he pushed on. "I want to stay with him." Gasps rippled through the gallery. The man at the back cursed under his breath, but the judge's gavel struck sharply. Nathaniel's throat burned. He gripped the edge of the table, holding himself still. Daniel had said what no lawyer could. The judge leaned back, her gaze lingering on the boy with something close to sorrow. "Thank you, Daniel. That took courage." Daniel returned to his seat beside Nathaniel, the fire truck still trembling in his hands. Nathaniel placed a steady arm around him, whispering, "You did well. So well." The decision wasn't spoken yet, but the truth had already filled the room. The judge's chambers fell silent after Daniel's words. For a long moment, only the hum of the fluorescent lights filled the air. Then the gavel struck once, decisive. "Custody is hereby granted to Mr. Nathaniel Cross." The words rang like a bell. Daniel blinked, unsure if he had heard right. Slowly, he turned to Nathaniel. Tears glistened in Nathaniel's deep blue eyes as he knelt, lowering himself to meet the boy's gaze. "You're safe now," Nathaniel whispered. His voice cracked, but held firm. "Forever." For the first time, Daniel loosened his grip on the fire truck. The toy slipped into Nathaniel's waiting hand as Daniel threw his small arms around his neck. Nathaniel held him tight, feeling the fragile trust solidify into something unbreakable. Across the aisle, the estranged father sputtered in protest, but the bailiff's steady hand silenced him. The judge's glare ended the argument. The matter was closed. Outside the courthouse, snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes drifting instead of the storm that had raged the night they met. Nathaniel lifted Daniel into his arms, the boy's cheek pressed against his shoulder. For the first time in years, the mansion on Beacon Hill would no longer be silent. Nathaniel looked down at the fire truck resting in his palm, chipped and worn but shining in the pale light. A symbol of survival, of a boy's hope, and of the promise Nathaniel had made true. "Let's go home," he said. Weeks later, the mansion no longer echoed with emptiness. Laughter ran through its halls, small footsteps pounding across polished floors. In the study, the red fire truck sat in a place of honor on the mantel, no longer a shield of survival, but a reminder of the night everything changed. Nathaniel stood in front of reporters one crisp January morning. Cameras flashed as he announced the launch of the Daniel Foundation for Abandoned Children. "No child should face a blizzard alone," he said, his hand resting on Daniel's shoulder. The boy's eyes shone with quiet pride. At home that evening, the fireplace glowed once more. Daniel sat at the piano bench, tiny fingers pressing hesitant notes. Nathaniel leaned on the doorway, watching. The boy paused, turned, and whispered, "Can I call you Dad?" Nathaniel's chest tightened. He crossed the room, crouching to meet his gaze. His voice was steady, warm. "You already do." Daniel's smile bloomed, the firelight catching in his brown eyes. He slid from the bench and wrapped his arms around Nathaniel's neck. The mansion, once cold and hollow, was filled with the sound of family. And for the first time in his life, Nathaniel Cross felt whole.